This book, Top Doll, is ostensibly about a woman called Huguette Clark. She was a multi-millionaire. She was a recluse. She lived to the age of 104. She spent 80 of those 104 years holed up in a 42-room Manhattan sort of penthouse apartment, surrounded by this vast collection of antique and vintage dolls that she collected over the years. She spoke to hardly anyone. Her accountant, obviously, she was so rich, her lawyer, and these dolls. And I was just fascinated by this idea of someone who has all the money in the world. They live for a century and more, but they just never go out. What are they doing in this space? You know, it was just this kind of mystery that I wanted to unpick. But also, it's this, you know, by the nature of it, it's the story of America. Her father was this self-made man, made his money in copper mining, literally minting the pennies. And in that sense, he really embodied the American dream. But, you know, that dream is just a facade. And I was so interested in what was behind it. And it's interesting because Huguette Clark didn't own any black dolls, really. So when I told the story, I wanted to tell it through this multicultural lens that reflected more accurately what we know America is. So it's kind of this way to explore that history through some very, very eccentric characters. You know, one of the poetry books that you would feel almost quite counterintuitively was an influence on this book is actually Louise Gluck's book, The Wild Iris, because it tells, you know, it tells a story through multiple narrators in quite a sort of prismatic way. So we don't get a linear narrative. We get these different facets of a prism, and that starts to help the story accumulate. So I always like to look at things through multiple viewpoints. That was one of the books that I looked to. Another might be, that operates in quite a similar way, is Kai Miller's book, The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion. And there he's looking at trying to tell a story from quite opposing viewpoints. So this idea of how might you use poetry specifically as well, and the poem. How are you going to use the poem to come together to tell this longer story with a multitude of voices, and do so in a way that really, I mean, one of the great things for me was differentiating those voices. And that's what I wanted to do. So the book's got multi-narrators, and all of the dolls speak in specific poetic forms that basically correlate to their provenance. So Dolly's porcelain, she's antique. She speaks in sonnets, of course. What else is she going to speak in? And she's got this little sort of slightly hysterical nature. And, you know, the sonnet is a very musical form. And it's quite little and compact. And so it really made sense for Dolly to speak in many sonnets. And she does. She speaks in crowns of sonnets, and they're rhymed, and they've got bits of French in them. And in fact, to make up that weird French language, it's this kind of French doll English muddle. I basically would write a line of the sonnet, and then I would feed it into Google Translate it into French, then translate it back into English, and then I'd have a bit of a mess. And that was really good, because I wanted to create this kind of grammatical chaos. And then once I'd got the grammatical chaos and I had the ear for her voice, I then sort of started to take bits of the French out, because there was already quite a lot for the reader to be dealing with. And so that's how I created Dolly's voice. The general's voice, I was really thinking about that heritage that you have with, you know, the classic slave narrative, maybe sort of the essayist, James Baldwin. Yeah, very much that was the sort of voice that I wanted there. and the memoir, and it's kind of very sort of playful. I'm really honoured to be nominated, to be shortlisted, and I think it's really just the idea that the book can have more readers, can have new readers, the dolls have got a lot to say and they've waited a long time to say it. And so I'm just very excited to be there in great company.